Hello, my name is Simon. Welcome to Why Is That, a free speech platform where we explore big ideas and the controversies of our time. Hello, beloveds, and welcome back to another episode of Why Is That? We were not on the air last week because we got bumped off for Auckland Heritage Week, strangely enough. So now we're back on the radio. And by we, right now I mean the royal we, as this will be our first solo show. I could go horribly wrong. So many people just go through life, go to work, and they're too busy to look into anything that's happening around the world and how that might affect them. Why is that? Today we'll be talking about immigration, but first, did you know a few days ago, control of the internet was handed over from the US government pretty much to the UN? Is this news to anyone? What could go horribly wrong? I'm sure it will not end up like, the UN Human Rights Councils, which have some of the worst abusers of human rights, governing the internet. And I'm sure no vicious dictatorships will be enacting censorship through this new order. I hope the sarcasm came through. It's, if you're not aware of it, I suggest you look into it. Even though I'm not a big fan of the US government, they have been pretty non-interventionary when it's come to matters of internet censorship, because they have the First Amendment of the American Constitution guaranteeing free speech. So that's been protecting the internet, but now it's handed over to the UN, which has no such guarantees for free speech. If you're interested in looking up more, I suggest you go to YouTube and look up a philosopher called Stefan Molyneux, who has done a number of recent shows on the topic. But an abridged version is China's quite famous for its internet censorship, with laws and regulations that have earned the nickname the Great Firewall of China. But this specific brand of internet censorship might be carted out in a number of other countries around the world because of this move, meaning free speech and freedom in general, which free speech is there to protect, might be taking a major blow. So we'll might do a show once the implications are more clear, but mark my words, no good's going to come from this. There's just going to be problems. And just a prediction to throw out there, I think it will affect in global internet commerce. But as I said, it's too early to say what will happen for sure. But in terms of human freedom, it's probably going to, let's just say Obama, who ran on a platform of hope and change, has probably ended up taking that away from millions and millions of people. But it might take a year or two or three for the cracks to show. Talking about cracks, what was I thinking doing a solo show? We do have a number of guests lined up for the future, but of course I had last week off and didn't plan for this week, and I don't know, this is kind of me facing my fears of doing a solo show, but I tell you, it's a lot better having somebody to talk to, but we will power on. So why did I want to look at immigration today? Well, I don't think people realize how different the world will be in 20 years. The world will be very, very different. And this is because of demographic changes and issues. For example, the one-child policy in China they're going to be short, predicted in the next 50 years, hundreds of millions of workers Can you imagine? This is both through declining birth rates and people too old to work. Japan is also looking at a shrinking population. There's an interesting factor there with what you call herbivore males, just a whole lot of Japanese men who have just given up on marriage and relationship with women, etc. In the West, I don't think it's quite like the MGTOW, men going their own way movement, where there's a noticeable phenomena of men giving up on marriage and relationships in general. Japan, being a homogenous society, has had an immigration experiment before, but they opened their doors to people of Japanese descent who settled in other countries. The big takers from there were Japanese that settled in Brazil. Now, Japan thought they were going to get a whole lot of brand new Japanese immigrants, where what they got was a whole lot of Brazilians. They were culturally Brazilian. They were into soccer, well, so the Japanese. But, barbecues and loud Latin music, etc., that did not result in a good gelling. But Japan being quite a homogenous society, they're unlikely to open the doors to people who are radically different than themselves. Unlike in the West, one of the things I don't think a lot of people are aware of, it might have got some media coverage, but it's one of those things that are quickly forgotten, that in the UK Labour Party, when in power, had a policy of radical immigration with the actual aim of shaping the demographics in the UK, basically making it less British and bringing in people from countries that are naturally left-leaning to shore up the Labour base. If you're looking for a citation, you can, there's many things written about. You can look up a Guardian article called How Labour Threw Open Its Doors to Mass Migration in a Secret Plot to Make a Multicultural UK. A quote from it says, "The document was not published in the original format over fears of the adverse public reaction. Instead, it was released a year later as a research document on the economic benefits of migration." Now, we've had a recent thing here in New Zealand where the benefits of immigration have been called into question, and former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who's running for the UN Secretary General job, said, "Oh, no, the economic benefits." Have you ever got the feeling that's just used as a bribe? Sure, we're diluting the culture, but, you'll get money from it. I remember reading a North and South article, which is a magazine, if people aren't aware of it, that was talking about migration. And it was saying originally it was we needed to bring migrants in because we were short of labour, and with the extra economic production, we'll be rich. And of course, when the country, it didn't make everyone rich, obviously, or noticeably better off, it became multiculturalism just makes us better people. Which is funny because I recall there being multiple cultures before in New Zealand and a lot of Western countries before multiculturalism. And in the UK, this has raised a number of questions. Migration was pretty much the major issue behind the whole Brexit vote. When you're looking at the majority of London, most of them are foreign-born or second generation. It's coming up to soon. It will be half of London, which, considering that London is about 8.7 million people, that's more than the population of New Zealand. There's also the question of Muslim no-go areas in London, something which a number of authorities have denied, but a number of police officers have gone to the media and said, yes, there are areas we are afraid to police, or that will just not call us because they have internal policing. Of course, this takes the whole Brexit vote takes place with the backdrop of the European Migrant Crisis, originally called the Syrian Refugee Crisis, which, once it was shown that less than 20% of the people coming in were actually Syrian refugees, and many of those that were there were economic migrants who were not fleeing warfare. But of course, Syria as a conflict zone was in the news. But also, so was Ukraine, and a lot of vicious fighting, and 1 million Ukrainian refugees want to enter the EU and were denied. You do not hear about this so much in the mainstream media. But of course, you did hear calls in the mainstream media to allow the migrants or refugees who are predominantly Muslim to be accepted in, because Europe, like China and Japan, is looking at a demographic shortfall. So they needed workers. And of course, you can't just create more workers. You've got to breed and then spend resources to bring up children and then educate them. So bringing in a whole lot of adults would seem like an ideal solution if you're just looking at numbers. But of course, a number of these refugees that are coming in, they're not literate in their home language, let alone fluent in the host language. So, and most of them have ended up on welfare, which is an additional drain to the system. This has been one of the big problems, which anyone could have seen from a while off, of demographic decline from not having reached the replacement rate for having children, which I believe is 2.4. Just to keep the population stable. So 3 plus to grow the population, which is also needed for economic benefits. And we're facing the problem that with a top-heavy aging population, who's going to be paying the pensions and healthcare for the elderly, and also just normal taxes, when basically the tax burden falls to an ever-decreasing tax base. It's going to cause a problem. In a way, with a lot of countries, especially in the West, but also China and Japan, are basically paying for wanting to defy gravity. We have not been reaching replacement rates. And in the West, we've been looking to migration to try to fill that shortfall. And this is why multiculturalism has become so popular and promoted by the government. Funny how political correctness is promoted by the political establishment. In case you've missed it, there has been a lot of rape scandals in Europe surrounding the migrants, which government authorities have covered up in a number of cases. This stems from long-time migrants, such as the Rotherham child sex exploitation scandal that took place between 1997 and 2013, where gangs of Pakistani men groomed and raped and prostituted out about 1,400 young girls. One of the stories I remember is one of the girls who were being raped, the father of the rapist rang up her father with her cell phone so he could hear his daughter being raped. A number of horrific stories like this, and the big thing is the authorities covered it up for about 10 years. And when said authorities were asked why they didn't do anything about it, most of them said they didn't want to be accused of being racist. So 1,400 young girls who were abducted, raped, tortured, prostituted out because the authorities did not want to be seen as racist. And this was also in the period of the UK Labour Party's secret immigration plans. You also have places like in Sweden has become the rape capital of Europe. and they're just not keeping, a lot of Scandinavian countries that have taken in migrants are just not keeping records of who are doing sexual assaults. So you can't say it's the migrants because, you had the case of Cologne in Germany, the New Year sexual assaults, which when the German government basically tried to ignore, and when it got some media coverage, they had a reenactment. The attackers were Middle Eastern, but when they did a reenactment on German TV, they used native German men. This is one of the big reasons I'm a big fan of alternate media, because the government didn't want to deal with it, the media didn't want to deal with it, but these things can get out on the internet, which has just been handed over to the UN. So that's going to be interesting in the future. Now, moving to America, immigration, especially illegal immigration, has played a huge part in the American elections. We covered this in our very first show, but this recap, it's estimated the biggest group of illegal immigrants in the US are Mexicans. It is estimated that 10% of the Mexican population resides in the US and costs the average US household, I think it's $2,000 to $3,000 per year. There is no definitive number in that. There are a number of estimates, and this isn't even taken into account what's called remittances that are sent back to home countries. Or the areas in southern states which are becoming Hispanic majority have become Hispanic supremacist. But the most interesting bit with the American example, around illegal immigration, is amnesty, which is giving citizenship to illegal immigrants, which are primarily demographics that vote for the Democratic Party, especially Hispanics. So with elections usually being decided by a few million votes, making a whole lot of illegal Hispanic immigrants voting citizens would probably mean the Republican Party would never get in ever again. Of course, President Obama has already tried through executive action, which was defeated by the Supreme Court, to have programs to grant amnesty. Amnesty is a big part of Hillary Clinton's platform, and Trump, on the other hand, is looking to deal with illegal immigration. So we're seeing a situation where whoever wins this US election might drastically change the US. In fact, one party might not be standing at the end of this. It's rather Hillary gets in and amnesty is granted and more immigration from left-leaning countries is brought in, and the Republicans will never win again, or Trump will get in and look to deal with illegal immigration, which will ultimately eat into the Democratic voting base. It's as we were talking about before, the world is changing, but it's especially the Western countries that are bringing in people from all around the world. There's a brilliant video, if you go on YouTube, by a YouTuber called Black Pigeon Speaks, that he did on Canada. The video is called Post-National Country, Canada Has No Core Identity. The claim that Canada has no core identity comes from its current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who is basically there is no core culture that immigrants need to assimilate into. Being the cynic I am, I think a lot of this derives from that the Trudeau family is from Quebec, which is the French minority in Canada. And from years past, has been interviewed on French-Canadian TV, saying about how basically Quebec dominates the rest of Canada, citing all its greatest prime ministers are from there, including his father, who, and in my opinion, the only reason he is there is because of the Trudeau family name. Justin Trudeau has grown up, even though he's a very left-wing politician, grew up with fantastic wealth, and his only jobs before entering into politics were being a substitute drama teacher and a part-time ski instructor during ski season. Coming from a working-class background myself, I look at some of these champagne socialists and think they're all ideology. But anyway, immigration does bring up big issues about national identity. Is there a core identity that immigrants need to appear to? Using another Canadian example, Gavin McGuinness, who's with the Rebel Media, he did a video about how basically a wave of immigration would be, the gates would open, a wave of immigration would come in, and then they'd shut the gates. And then they'd wait a while, and the wave of immigrants that came in would assimilate, and then the gates were open again, and a wave would come in, and then it would just shut. And that's just the way it worked. It wasn't, no, you had to be from the British Isles, etc., but... And then it just got to the stage, and I think this applies to a lot of Western countries, where the gates have just been removed. And it's not doctors and engineers. In many countries, a lot of low-skilled workers are brought in, which forces the native population to compete with, which is a form of class warfare, really. But I think the important principle is that immigration should benefit the existing population. If there is a need for doctors, bring in doctors. If there is a need for tradesmen, then bring in tradesmen. When I was telling someone I was going to do the show on immigration, they pointed to me to a poster by the Ministry of Social Development here in New Zealand, which handles benefits. The poster, the picture is of two men who look to be of Southeast Asian descent, and it has the caption, "It was hard not speaking English, but then we got jobs." And the caption underneath is, "Helping two awesome Kiwis just like you find jobs," with awesome underlined. Now, if you're born and raised in New Zealand, you speak English. So obviously the picture is of two people who have migrated to New Zealand. And it's funny how they say, two awesome Kiwis just like you. Well, they're not just like me. I mean, if they were born and raised in New Zealand and spoke English and had the same cultural experience, yeah, they'd probably be just like me, just of another ethnic descent. But I find it funny how they've underlined the word awesome. So that it's a propaganda poster, pretty much. And it's justifying the migration policy. Why are there people in New Zealand being brought in who do not speak the language of the land? And of course, this is also happening on a larger scale in the US, with a lot of legal immigrants who only speak Spanish, and also in Europe with the Migrant Crisis, with the migrants coming from very diverse countries, speaking a number of different languages. But the serious question needs to be raised: if you can't speak the language of the land, how can you contribute meaningfully to society. Even if you had a job and paid taxes, how could you make an informed decision to who to vote for? Or would you just not vote? Or would you have to rely on somebody else telling you, vote for this party and you'll get this? Because so much politics these days is just bribery, just out-and-out bribery, funded by an unsustainable rate of borrowing, which I suppose is no surprise. They keep pushing immigration for economic growth because they need us to keep it going a little bit further. As long as everything doesn't collapse under their watch and they don't get blamed for it, that's fine. To finish off, the world will change. There will be huge demographic changes. The population of China will collapse, the same with Japan, but there'll still be a China and a Japan. When the Iron Curtain and the Soviet Union fell, there were still Hungarians in Budapest, Poles in Warsaw, Latvians in Latvia. But in 100 years' time, will there still be a Germany? Will there still be a France? I think we're paying for a lot of hubris of trying to have our cake and eat it too. We wanted this model of continuous economic growth, but we didn't have children at the replacement rates, nor did we really rail in how we lived. And we borrowed, and we borrowed, and we devalued our culture. The most precious thing we have. We took it from being the pride of place. It's thousands of years in the making, linked to our ancestors, and we did not have the right to do so. As mentioned before, we are multicultural before multiculturalism. Many people moved to Western countries to enjoy Western freedom, maybe to reinvent themselves. And we do them also a disservice. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against migration, even from different cultures, and my family was ethnically diverse before Western societies became ethnically diverse. But my point is, there was always the understanding that there'd be a degree of assimilation, that you would uphold the values of the people of the land. Now, a lot of Western English-speaking countries derived from the British Empire, and or even the US has large traits of British values. Now, the thing is, dear listener, can you articulate what British values are? What sets them apart from other cultures? What makes it distinct? If you're listening to this, you speak English. Now, you've rather been brought up in the culture, which, if you can't name these values, why is that? And if you were not raised in the English-speaking world, but migrated here, can you articulate these values? And if not, isn't it strange you move to a society where you can't articulate the values? Now, I don't mean any of this judgmentally for anyone, but if you can't answer this, I suggest you look it up. I mean, have conversations with your friends and family about this. It's a truly interesting topic, especially, culture does something one way and you think, why is that? So, I'm going to draw it to a close there. That's my first solo show, which I enjoyed so much. I'm never, ever doing again. Hopefully next week we have a guest. It's just so much better having discussions. To be honest, it wasn't a conscious choice to have a solo show. It was just, we couldn't find a guest for this week. But just to run out the clock, I just thought I'd raise the idea of, have you ever considered doing a first aid course? If, somebody needs it, be the hero, be the good citizen. Join me, Simon and guests, 104.6 FM at 3:15 on Tuesdays for my show, Why Is That? Or anytime online at planetaudio.org.nz/Why Is That? You can also type in Why Is That into YouTube, and it's hosted on the channel Dialectic already.